All right, everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that, well, let's face it, nobody really wants to become an expert in.
Right.
But it's something that, unfortunately, a lot of people have to deal with: child custody.
Yeah, it's one of those things you hope you never have to think about.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this YouTube video that I found. It's called Child Custody Secrets Lawyers Don't Want You to Know.
Ooh, secrets. Sounds a little dramatic, don't you think?
Yeah, it's from this channel called The Legal Strategist.
Okay, I've heard of them. They put out some pretty interesting stuff.
Right. So naturally, I was like, all right, what are these so-called secrets?
I gotta know.
I mean, I'm curious too now.
Okay, so basically the video breaks down like 5 main points that you need to know if you're, going through this whole process.
All right, lay it on me. What are they?
Okay, so first, they talk about the difference between legal and physical custody.
Okay, that's a big one. People get that confused all the time. Right. Then there's this whole thing about documentation, like documenting everything.
Oh, yeah, you gotta have your receipt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they talk about, obviously the child's best interest. That's like the whole point of this,
Of
right?
course, that should be the top priority.
And then there's a section on avoiding conflict with your ex, which, easier said than done in a lot of these situations, right?
Right? Emotions run high. It's tough.
For sure. And then finally they talk about, do you really need to hire a lawyer?
Ah, the age-old question. All right, well, let's unpack all of this.
Let's do it. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about this whole legal versus physical custody thing. Um, I feel like these terms get thrown around a lot, but I'm not sure everyone really understands what they mean.
Yeah, it's a common misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So legal custody basically means who gets to make the big decisions for the child. Things like education, healthcare, religious upbringing, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so it's not just about where the child lives.
Right. That's where physical custody comes in. Physical custody determines where the child primarily resides.
Okay, so you're saying you can have one without the other.
Exactly. You can have legal custody without having physical custody, and vice versa.
Hmm. Interesting. So, like, a parent could have a say in their child's schooling, even if the child doesn't live with them full time.
Exactly. It's about making sure both parents have a meaningful role in the child's life, even if they have different living arrangements.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see how that would be really important for the child's well-being. All right, so let's move on to this documentation thing. The video really hammers this point home.
It's crucial. People often underestimate the power of good documentation.
Right, but how do you even begin to, like, document everything? What are some of the pitfalls people should be aware of?
Well, the biggest mistake is thinking that only official documents matter, like court orders or something.
Ah, okay.
But in reality, it's often the everyday communication that can be really valuable.
Like what? Give me an example.
Yeah. Text messages, emails, voicemails, even social media posts. All of that can be used as evidence.
Really? So, like, if your ex is, say, constantly late picking up the kids, you should be writing that down.
Absolutely. Keep a detailed log of every interaction, especially when it comes to things like custody schedules or financial support.
Okay. Wait, does that mean, like, every single time you text or talk?
You don't necessarily need to document every single thing, but anything that relates to the custody arrangement or the child's well-being is worth noting.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about, like, finances? How do you document that?
Keep records of any financial transactions related to the child. Child support payments, medical expenses, school fees.
Right, right. So if there's ever a dispute, you have proof.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
without proof, it's just your word against theirs.
Okay, that's a really good point. And I guess all this documentation would become especially important if you end up having to go to court, right?
Absolutely. A judge is going to want to see evidence, not just hear stories.
All right, that's definitely something I'm going to remember. Now, let's talk about this whole idea of the child's best interests. Sounds good in theory, but how does a judge actually determine what's best for the child?
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's no magic formula. But ultimately, it boils down to what will provide the child with the most stable, loving, and supportive environment.
Okay, but that's still pretty vague.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the specific things they consider?
Well, they'll look at things like the child's age, their health, their emotional needs.
Right, right.
They'll also consider each parent's ability to provide for those needs. Things like their parenting skills, their work schedule, their home environment.
Okay, so it's not just about who has the bigger house or the fancier car.
Right. It's about who can provide the most stable and nurturing environment for the child. Actually, I had this one case
Oh, just
where
tell me about it.
The parents were fighting over which school the child should attend. One parent wanted the child to go to this like really prestigious private school, but it was really far away and it would meant the child having to like completely uproot their life. The other parent wanted them to stay at their current school, which was, a good school, just not as fancy.
So what happened?
Well, in the end, the judge decided that staying at their current school was in the child's best interests.
Because of the stability and the routine.
Exactly. It was about minimizing disruption and maintaining consistency for the child.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like really the key is to focus on what's going to create the most stable and supportive environment for the child, right?
Absolutely. And, judges are also really starting to look at which parent encourages a healthy relationship with the other parent,
Oh, that's interesting.
because that's a huge part of a child's well-being, right? Having a good relationship with both parents.
Makes sense. So if a parent is constantly bad-mouthing their ex, that's not going to look good in court.
Not at all. It shows the judge that they're not putting the child's needs first.
Okay, that's really important to remember. So speaking of navigating that relationship with your ex, the video talks a lot about avoiding conflict. But, that's easier said than done, especially when emotions are running high.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the hardest parts of the whole process.
So, do you have any practical tips for, actually managing that?
Sure. First and foremost, try to keep communication focused on the child.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Avoid getting into personal arguments or rehashing old issues.
Right, because that's not going to help anyone.
Exactly. Stick to the facts, be concise, and keep things businesslike.
Okay, so no long emotional texts or late-night phone calls.
Exactly. And if your ex starts to get heated, don't engage. Just say something like, I'm not comfortable discussing this right now. Let's revisit it later.
Oh, that's a good line. I'm going to have to remember that one.
And if communication is really difficult, you might want to consider using a mediator or a co-parenting app.
Oh, yeah, those apps. I've heard of those.
Yeah.
Do they actually work?
Well, they can be helpful. They can help keep communication neutral and focused.
And some of them even have, conflict resolution features, right?
Exactly. They can provide a platform for resolving disagreements without things getting too heated.
Okay, that's really useful to know. All right, so we've covered legal versus physical custody, documentation, the child's best interest, and avoiding conflict with your ex. Now, for the final point, hiring a lawyer. The video seems pretty adamant about this.
Yeah.
But, let's be realistic. Not everyone can afford to hire a lawyer.
Right. And I will say there are definitely situations where you might not absolutely need one.
Okay, like what?
For example, if you and your ex are on good terms and can agree on a custody arrangement that works for everyone, something that's fair and in the child's best interests,
Yeah, that makes sense.
you might be able to file the paperwork yourselves and avoid the expense of a lawyer.
Okay. But even in those situations, it's probably still a good idea to at least consult with a lawyer, right?
Absolutely. Even if you don't hire them to represent you throughout the whole process, it's worth getting some legal advice to make sure you're not missing anything important.
Yeah, like maybe there's some legal nuances that we're not even aware of.
Exactly. A lawyer can help you understand your rights, make sure the agreement is legally sound, and protect you from potential problems down the road.
Okay, so it's like having that expert in your corner to, guide you through the process and make sure you're not making any mistakes.
Precisely. And they can also be really helpful if things start to get contentious with your ex. They can act as a buffer and help keep things calm and focused.
Yeah, I can see how that would be super valuable.
So yeah, while it's not always strictly necessary to hire a lawyer, it's definitely something to seriously consider.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. We've gone from secrets to solid strategies for anyone facing this, this whole complex world of child custody.
Hopefully it's given you some clarity and some things to think about.
Exactly. And on that note, I want to leave you with one final thought. Imagine you're the judge in a custody case.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. What would be the single most important factor you'd consider when deciding what's truly best for the child? Think about that, folks. And until next time, keep diving deep.
See ya!